Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Unleash Your Voice. I am your host, Priya, and I'm so glad you're here today for this solo episode because today I want to tell you a story, a personal one that I've shared pieces of before, but I've never really broken down in a way that shows you exactly what I did and why it worked. And I'm sharing it because I think it's going to completely change the way you think about advocating for yourself at work. Here's the thing. Most of the conversations we have about self-advocacy and self-promotion are focused on job interviews, how to tell your story when someone asks, how to answer, tell me about yourself, how to walk into a job search and stand out. And that is important. That's the work I do every day with my clients, as you probably know. But today I want to talk about something different. I want to talk about what happens when you're already in the role, when you're already on the team, when you have a goal, a real specific goal, and the people who could help you get there don't even know you exist yet. Because that's exactly where I was in 2023. And what I did about it is something I think every high performing woman needs to hear. So let's get into it. Okay, so I mentioned it, this was in 2023. So in that year, I was in my last year at Salesforce, although I will say I didn't know that at the time. But I'd been in tech for a few years at that point. You probably know I used to work in television. I was a news anchor and morning show host. And then from there, I pivoted to being a solutions consultant in tech. My first tech job was at a company called Hootsuite. And then from there, I was recruited to Slack. And then Slack was acquired by Salesforce. So by this point, I'd built real experience in tech, great relationships, and a real track record. And in 2023, I set a goal for myself, a very specific goal that was meaningful for me. I wanted to speak at conferences and events on behalf of Salesforce. Now, this was not random. Speaking has always been something I'm deeply passionate about. I love the experience of sharing information with a room of people and just experiencing the energy, the light bulb moments that happen in a group setting like that. I had done it a lot during my TV career. I'd spoken at conferences and events. I was an MC. And when I moved into tech, I kind of put that part of myself on hold because I really needed to focus on building my technical skills and proving myself in a new industry. But by 2023, so this is about 4 years into my tech career, I was really ready to bring everything together. I wanted to use my storytelling background in this new context. I used it every day in presentations, conversations with clients. But this was the year that I really wanted to be able to represent Salesforce on stage. And remember, Salesforce is a 70,000 person company. So being able to stand out in that sea of extremely talented, high performing people, I knew it was not going to be an easy feat. I also had a manager who knew exactly what I wanted that year, and he was championing me. So I felt like I was in a good spot. And then, as it does, everything changed. I got unexpectedly moved onto a brand new team. So I had a new manager, new senior leadership, and we were distributed across Canada and the US. Nobody knew me, especially at the leadership level on this team. I did have a few peers that I knew, but none of those leaders knew who I was. They didn't know what I wanted. And that advocate who I had, my manager, was now gone. So I remember thinking, okay, I have two choices here. I can wait and hope that eventually the right people will notice me, figure out what I'm good at, and think to ask me to be part of some of these events, or I can be intentional about this. And if you know me, you know I chose to be intentional. Of course I did. So a few weeks after getting moved onto this new team, I got some news. They were flying our entire team to New York for 3 days of training and networking. And I immediately knew this was a really big moment. Here's the thing about being on a distributed team. And if you're on one, you know all about this, but you rarely get FaceTime with senior leaders, right? Most of your interactions are on Zoom, in Slack, in quick emails. You don't get those organic hallway, water cooler, lunchroom conversations. You don't get the impromptu coffee chats. You don't get the moments where someone just naturally gets to know you because they see you every day or even just a couple of days a week or a month. So when I found out we were all going to be in the same room for 3 days, I knew this was potentially my one real opportunity for the year to be in front of people who could help me reach my goal. My team was distributed across Canada and the US. I'm based in Toronto. Most of my leadership was in New York or San Francisco. So definitely a rare opportunity to have everyone in one place. I did not leave any of this to chance. I went into this 3 days with a plan. And that plan started with something I now teach inside my strategic storytelling system in my programs, both group and one-on-one. This plan started with clarity. So before I walked into that room in New York, I got really clear on three things. Number one, my goal. And I mean really specific. So if you're thinking about, okay, I'm already interested in figuring out how I can apply this, you need to be really clear on your goal. So not I want more visibility, not I want to grow my career. My goal was I want to speak at conferences and events on behalf of Salesforce this year. When your goal is that specific, everything else becomes clearer, right? You know what conversations to have, you know what to share about yourself, you know what you're working towards, so you can really create that path to getting there. Number two, my story. I needed clarity on a power story that would connect who I am to what I wanted. And I used the CAPE framework that I teach my clients to build that power story. If you haven't heard of that framework yet, don't worry. I'm going to share what it includes in just a few minutes. If you've been to my Power Story Playbook Masterclass or my Power Story and Presence workshop, you know this framework. So the CAPE framework for building your power story starts with C, your core theme. For me, this was strategic storytelling. This is a pattern that showed up throughout my career. The fact that I was able to use storytelling to advocate both for myself and also to make compelling cases in presentations when I was in boardrooms and with clients. So core theme, C and CAPE, strategic storytelling. My anchoring example, my background as a news anchor and morning show host, which is where I built my storytelling skills and my experience on stage. Then P is a parallel example. So another example that really shows that theme, strategic storytelling in action. And for this, I chose the speaking I had done at conferences and events while I was in TV. Finally, E and CAPE is your engaged tie-in. So this is the part where I connect it all to the present moment. I've been focused on building my technical skills since pivoting into a career in tech. And this year, I'm ready to bring everything together and speak at more conferences and events on behalf of the company. Okay, so those are the components of the story. It's not a pitch. It's not a resume recitation. It's a clear, compelling narrative that connects my past to my present to what I'm ready for and what I want next. Okay, number three, I needed clarity on my strategy. This is the part I really want you to lean into because this is where most people get stuck, right? You have this story, but then you have to figure out how to create the opportunity to tell it. So here's what most people do when they want something at work. They either don't say anything and hope someone figures it out, or they go in too directly and it feels uncomfortable, like they're asking for a favor. Neither of those really work. So what I did instead was use a strategy I call ask the question you want to answer. Okay, so let me paint this picture for you of how this worked. So I knew the question I wanted to be asked was, how did you end up working in tech? Because that question was my opening to share my story naturally. My TV background, my passion for storytelling, that pivot into tech, and my goal to speak at events. So every time I met a new senior leader that week in New York, I would have a genuine conversation. I'd introduce myself, as you usually do, ask them about their background, creating space for their story first. You always want to try and build trust and rapport. And the best way to do that is to create space for other people's stories. So I would ask them that question, right? How did you end up working in tech? I would genuinely listen. And some of the stories were really fascinating, by the way. One of my leaders actually used to work in a circus before getting into tech. So he had this incredible story. And when I say, genuinely listening, I mean asking follow-up questions, right? Showing real interest in the person you're talking to and their story. And then naturally, they would ask me the same question back. What about you? How did you end up working in tech? And that was my moment to share the power story I had prepared. So I would say, well, actually, I had a whole other career before this. I was a news anchor and morning show host, and that's really where I fell in love with strategic storytelling. So when I was looking to pivot into a new career, the solutions consultant role really just clicked because I saw the opportunity to use storytelling in a completely new context. During my time in TV, I did some speaking at conferences and events. That's also been another big passion of mine. So since I joined the tech world, I've really been focused on building my technical skills because that's the area that I was lacking in. But this year, now that it's been 4 years, I'd really love to bring everything together and speak at more conferences and events on behalf of the company. So if you hear of any opportunities, I'd love to be considered. That's it. That's the whole thing. No pitch, no big ask, just a story shared naturally in a real conversation that clearly communicated who I am, what I'm good at, and what I want. And here's the key. I didn't just do it once. I did it over and over again with every senior leader I met that week because you need people to connect the dots for you. You need your story to be in enough heads that when an opportunity comes up, your name comes up with it, especially in the rooms you are not in. So I went home from New York. I went back to my regular work. And then a few weeks later, I started getting messages from people at Salesforce. I'd never even met some of them. Hey, I heard you have a background in professional speaking. We'd love to talk about getting you on stage at one of our upcoming events. And just like that, it all started to snowball. That year, I spoke at HIMSS, a healthcare and technology conference in Chicago. I spoke at Salesforce's World Tour in New York, and it really just kept growing from there. Not because I went in with an elevator pitch and made a direct ask, not because I had the right title or the biggest platform, but because I gave people a story worth repeating, and they repeated it in rooms I wasn't in. That is the power of strategic storytelling. And I actually found out after how some of this started because one of my leaders who I had met that weekend in New York, but I didn't know very well, he came up to me at an event and said, "Oh, it was really great to see you on stage. I'm so glad that worked out." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm really glad it worked out too." And then I just asked him, "Oh, did you have something to do with this?" And he was like, "Well, yeah, I remember our conversation when we first met. And, I was in a meeting and they were saying we need to get some speakers together for our conference in Chicago. I remembered what you said. So yeah, I brought your name up and a couple of other people said that they were also aware of your background. So that's how that happened." And that was just confirmation for me. I mean, I had guessed that something like that happened, but that was just confirmation of the effectiveness of sharing this story. You really want to make sure the story is memorable and easily repeatable too. Okay. I want to bring this back to you because I know some of you are listening to this and thinking, okay, Priya, that's a great story, but I'm not trying to become a speaker. I just want to get promoted or recognized or finally feel like the people above me actually see what I'm bringing to the table. And here's what I want you to know. The principle is exactly the same. Your story, when it's clear, specific, and strategically shared, travels beyond the conversations you have. It ends up in rooms you're not in. It shapes how people talk about you when your name comes up. It's the difference between, "Oh yeah, she's great," and, "Oh, you should talk to her. She's the one who did X," or "She's the one who led Y. She's working towards Z." That second version, that's what gets you the promotion. That's what gets you tapped for the high visibility projects. That's what gets you the seat at the table that you have been working toward. But it doesn't happen by accident. It happens when you do the work to get clear on your story and when you get intentional about how you share it. So here's what I want you to take away from today's episode. 3 things. First, get specific about your goal. Not "I want to grow," but what does growth actually look like for you right now? A promotion, a specific project you want to work on, a seat on a leadership committee. Get it down to one clear, specific thing. Second, build the story that connects where you've been to what you want next. Use the CAPE framework if you have it. If you don't, think about what is the core theme that runs through your best work. What's a specific example that proves it? And how does that connect to what you want right now? And if you want to learn the CAPE framework, I'll tell you how in a couple of minutes here, because I do have an upcoming session. Third, find your version of ask the question you want to answer. What's the natural opening that lets you share your story authentically? What conversation could you be having that makes it easy and natural to talk about where you're headed? You don't have to announce yourself. You don't have to brag. You just have to be intentional and conversational. Because when you give people a story worth repeating, they will repeat it in the rooms you're not in. And that is when everything changes. If this episode resonated with you, I would love for you to share it with a colleague or a friend who needs to hear it. And if you've been waiting for the right moment to get really intentional about your own story, I want to invite you to join me for the Power Story and Presence Workshop. It's a free 3-day live experience happening May 19th through 21st from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern on Zoom each day. Over those 3 sessions, we're going to cover the first impression formula, how to build your story, that's the CAPE framework, and the leadership language that makes your value undeniable. To save your spot, you can head to the link in the show notes or DM me the word presence on Instagram or LinkedIn, and I will get you registered. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I hope this story stays with you. And more importantly, I hope it inspires you to start telling your own story. Until next time, remember, your story is the one thing you have that no one else has. I'll see you next week.